don't know why it started. I don't have any definite answers for that myself. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them just as an object for pleasure, not a living, breathing human. Being hunting in itself was a thrill, never knowing who I'd meet, how nice looking they'd be, how much fun we'd have. The killing was a means to an end. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control, not having to consider their wishes, being able to keep them there as long as I wanted. I don't regret it. That's the funny thing. I was at home, asleep, and got a call from a source who told me that it looks like there's a guy who's been saving body parts in his apartment. It was very odd because it's Milwaukee. Those kind of things don't happen here. I'm Annie Schwartz. I was a reporter for the Milwaukee Journal. I was the only journalist on the scene. Detectives had not even begun to arrive yet. It was a quiet scene in a way that crime scenes normally are not. I think that is what struck me the most. My wife and we were asleep and the police knocked on our door, and the first thing I thought was, what did I do? Why are they here? My name is Van Elbas and I lived across the hall from Jeffrey Dahmer. The officers told us that we had to evacuate the building, and I saw that, hey, there's a lot of police over in Jeff's apartment. And the first thing I said was, is Jeff okay? And one of the officer said, yeah, 11. I said, 11. What he said, we found 11 skulls. That was horrible. It was horrible to know that someone that I had liked as an individual to commit all of these crimes. I was in a state of shock. I walked up the stairs and I stepped into the apartment. It looked like a pretty normal apartment that would be in a low-income part of town. It wasn't terribly clean and organized. It just looked like a single guy lived there. It did smell, but it's not unusual that you might smell urine or you might smell garbage that somebody hadn't taken out in a while. I was called about 3 a.m. to come in and interview a guy that had 7 or 8 skulls in his apartment. And I thought they were kidding, that it was a joke. My name is Den Murphy. I was a detective on the homicide unit. I was briefed by the lieutenant. He told me the guy had body parts in his freezer. He had a heart, he had a bicep, and the body parts were cut in little squares, like hamburger patties. And in my years working, I never had a case where there was this many victims and nobody not knowing anything. Police in Wisconsin this morning are investigating a grisly discovery in a Milwaukee apartment. The discovery of pieces of bodies police found parts of, as many as 15 human bodies inside. Police are questioning the 31-year-old man who lives in the apartment. You don't shoot me for what I did. I said, why don't you just shoot me? When I walked into the interview room the first time. You don't shoot me. For what I did, I said, why don't you just shoot me? I asked him why he felt so strongly about cleanliness. What I did, you guys will be famous. The following will be a taped interview taken from Jeffrey, Lionel Dahmer. I spent 66 hours interviewing Dahmer, and each time we got more into depth as to what he did, how he did it. He remembered everything, even his first victim, he says. You always remember your first one. It started gradually. I had been having, for a good few years, fantasies of meeting a good-looking hitchhiker and sexually enjoying him. I never thought it would really happen. But everything was set up so perfectly. At one time in Ohio, I was interested in finding the Chippendale type, good-looking swimmer type build. And that just happened to be the week when no one was home. I had the car about 5 at night, and I was driving back home after drinking. I wasn't looking for anyone, but about a mile away from the house, there he was, hitchhiking along the road. He was attractive. I was attracted to him. I stopped and thought, well, should I pick him up or not. And I asked him if he wanted to go back and smoke some pot, and he said, "Oh, yeah." And we went into my bedroom, had some beer, and from the time I spent with him, I could tell he wasn't gay. In the township where I was from, homosexuality was the ultimate taboo. It was never discussed, never. I had desires to be with someone but never met anyone, one that was gay, that I knew of, so that was sexually frustrating. I didn't know how else to keep him there, other than to get the barbell and, to hit him over the head, then strangled him with the same barbell we discovered that Dahmer had just graduated from high school. He was 18 when he killed Hicks. I was out of my mind with fear that night. I didn't know what to do. I had gone to such an extreme PCE, the house for a while. I did masturbate later that night. I take the body to the crawl space the next day. I have to figure out a way to dispose of the evidence. A knife, a hunting knife. I feel uncomfortable talking about it on tape, not knowing who's going to be listening. This part, do you guys need this on tape? I'll just give you the general description. Go back the next night, slit the belly open, cut each piece, bagged each piece. It was trial and error. I really didn't know that much about the anatomy at the time. I didn't know how to dispose of the remains. But once I started doing it, it became sexually exciting to me. Jeffrey D's first recollection of arousal to that site was a visit to a museum that had sections of the human body. I am a forensic psychiatrist. I was asked by the prosecution to evaluate Mr. Dahmer. He was transfixed by this particular exhibit, and he recollected with me finding it rousing to look at the shiny lining of the viscera, the internal organs. It is a biological fact that shiny materials are more easily associated with sexual arousal than dull materials. Lingerie that's made of satin, leather, nylon. For Dahmer, instead of being aroused to what most men are, he became aroused to the shiny surface of viscera that night in Ohio, that one impulse of night. Nothing's been normal since then. It tainted your whole life after it happened. I thought I'd just try to live as normally as possible and bury it. But things like that don't stay buried. Dahmer took the bones, put them in a bag, and smashed them with a hutch hammer. Then he spread him out in the woods behind his house. They found teeth that were identified as Stephen Hicks. They also found the necklace that D-City threw in a river off a bridge. I spoke with Lionel Dahmer about his son, and I informed him what we found, and he was taken back by it. I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that he would do that. I felt very, very sick about it. That the first victim was killed at the Bath Roadhouse. My name is Lionel Dahmer. I'm the father of Jeff D. Durr. He was born in 1960 at a house that we rented in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as a very young boy. He was very happy, and he would run to me and jump into my arms. He liked to ride his little tricycle, and he used to like very much to ride on the handlebars of my bicycle. When you look at the whole movies, you see a happy time. We had a very close relationship. He wanted to be held, and would come running up to me whenever I'd come home from somewhere, and he just loved to be with me. And his mother, I met Joyce in Milwaukee. She was outgoing and liked to do new things, and a very loving person, it seemed to me. When Joyce became pregnant with Jeff, she developed seizure-type symptoms, and the doctors would prescribe arbitrates and morphine to calm her down because her body would become rigid, and she would develop a little bit of foam in the mouth. Unfortunately, the doctors didn't discover what it was exactly. The marriage was starting to dissolve, and I told Jeff and my youngest son, Dave. She was advocating for a divorce. Jeff reacted badly. He went out and started slapping trees with a branch. apparently because he felt like he lost control, and he was obviously frustrated by that. I started shutting down during the divorce proceedings. It was my way of shutting out any painful thoughts, just taking an attitude of not caring to save myself the pain of what was going on with the divorce. That was effective. It worked. Maybe it started then. I don't think any of us thought of Jeff Dahmer as a bad guy in high school. I knew him as a different person. One day I'm standing there in the hallway. Jeff Dahmer runs up to me, and he puts his head on my chest, and I'm like, "Hey, what are you doing? What's going on?" And then he stands up in his straight manner, and he says, "I wanted to hear what your heart sounds like." And then he ran away down the hall. My name is Mike Kroll, and I've known Jeffrey Dahmer all during our teenage years as a classmate in school. The Jeff Dahmer fan club was a group of us who thought Jeff Dahmer was just a funny kid because he would be into doing pranks and goofy things. My favorite thing that Jeff Dahmer did was in the library, and we had a pretty tough librarian. Jeff would be sitting there with his face in the book, not even looking up, and he would shout at the top of his lungs her name real fast and really loud, and she would get up and she would be, "Whoa, who said that? Who is that?" Never did she suspect it was Jeff Dahmer. He could get away with things for a long time and not get caught. And we learned that later from him too. People started talking about his drinking when he was about 17 years old. Jeff drank whatever he could get his hands on. Beer, whiskey, or even scotch. He would come home drunk from high school. The drinking got worse and worse, and I talked about the dangers of him continuing. But I think at that point, he was just so addicted, physically and mentally. It wasn't social drinking at a party. It was regular drinking, before, during, and after school. And I think that's how he got through the day. He was becoming sort of a lost person. Well, these are the high school yearbooks from River High when I was there, along with Jeff Dahmer. The most famous photograph in our yearbook is one of Dee's pranks, and this is the photograph right here in our senior year. They took photographs of all the groups. They took photographs of the sports groups and the clubs and everything else, and Jeff Dahmer got in group photos that he was not a member of the group. And I think the funniest one is the National Honor Society, which is supposed to be the brightest kids, right? The smartest kids. And definitely our senior year, Jeff Dahmer was not in that group academically, but he's in this photograph, and I believe it's the president of the group had him blacked out. So in all the yearbooks, there's this body without a head. And that's one of the first things I thought about when I heard he was arrested. For some reason, I just remember this strange photograph that is so haunting today to look at and know that this person, right dead center in the middle, is Jeffrey Dahmer. I think we're fascinated by Dahmer's childhood because it was a more normal childhood. He wasn't in reform school. He wasn't arrested. As a kid, he had a family around him. He had parents and brother, and he had a nice home. How could someone possibly do the things he did, given his background? He had everything going for him. What happened when I was a little kid? I was just like anybody else. I should have got a college degree, gone into real estate. That's what I should have done. I don't know what was going through my mind. These thoughts are very powerful, they do not leave during the investigation. We had to establish a timeline, so we took all the information we had, where they lived, where they moved, through what school they went through, all the activities that we could document, and we meet up a timeline. Everything that we know about Jeffrey D's crimes, we know because of his confession. There was a desire on his part to just unburden himself of all this information, and when he spoke to the detectives, Dahmer really was telling his own life story. I guess she's what you could call a perfect grandmother. Very kind, goes to church every Sunday. I started going to church with my grandma. I wanted to straighten my life out, read the Bible, tried to push out any sexual thoughts at all. I was doing pretty well for about 2 years. Sure enough, I started the compulsion. The drive increased sexual desires. I started drinking again. Dahmer had a couple of arrests for indecent exposure. One, he said he was urinating, and the other one was at the state fair, rubbed up against the guy in front of about 20 people in West Dallas. There was some LWD and lascivious behavior in a park that, I was involved in. There was no assault. It was just masturbation. He was charged with disorderly conduct, exposing himself to people, and he had a year's probation. I wanted to find a way to satisfy myself without hurting anyone, so I joined the bath club, went to gay bars. The gay area in Milwaukee was down on 2nd Street, 1st Street. It was kind of a close society, and Dahmer knew the area, and that was his hunting ground. The gay city in Milwaukee was very big. My name is Greg Shirley, and I lived in Milwaukee in the 1980. As you had 219, you had Large, and you had Park Avenue, where I worked. It was quite the scene. You never knew what was going to happen at Park Avenue, let me tell you. You have people dancing and taking their clothes off, where 219 was. That area was pretty seedy place. It was a lot of fun, I have to admit it. A lot of excitement, just being out in the crowd, in that type of atmosphere, not having to pretend that I was something that I wasn't, you know? And watching the strip-tease, there's some pretty good ones. These multi-floored clubs stay open till about 4 in the morning. Then they'd have the bathhouses. Spend the rest of the night in those. Dahmer told us in the bathhouses, people had a separate dressing room, and guys would go in and hook up and have sex or whatever, anything goes. The only rule they had in that place is that if a person said no, no was no. And he had success there for a time where he'd be able to hook up with a man, but he began to want to spend more time with the men that he found attractive enough to hook up with. They were all one-night stands. They made it clear that they had to be fat up, work. And I didn't want them to go, and so he began drugging their drinks. A lot of the people I met wanted anal sex. I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to find a way to spend the night with them, enjoy them, without having to perform. That he always woke up with someone and give him Helan, so they passed out. Helan is a sleeping pill. Jeff would start off with 1 or 2. The more he used, the sooner the people would go out. And Jeff is the more control he had, using about 5 pills, usually rendered them unconscious for about 4 hours. It was the only way I knew to keep them there and keep them with me. It gave me a sense of control and increased the sexual thrill. I trained myself to view people as objects of potential pleasure instead of seeing them as complete human beings. Sounds callous and but that's what I did. Jeffrey Dahmer was looking for a sexual partner who would not demand anything of him, who would not criticize him, who most importantly wouldn't have quick sex and then leave. He had a series of unpleasant sexual encounters with other men, none of which involved what he really wanted, which was to snuggle, to hug, to feel each other's warmth, to be able to fondle gently, to spend the whole night together without demanding more. Once I had the opportunity and a place where I could actually make these fantasies come true, then trying to hold them back just seemed to be too much. Desire grew and grew, more constant, stronger. I mean, it was the main focus of my life. First thing I did was head to the porno shops, make plans to watch the strip. Heck, my whole life revolved around that schedule. And that worked for him, though not for his victims. For a period of time, until one night, he gave too much medication to a victim, and paramedics had to be called. And they banned me from that bathhouse. They complained about me, used the excuse that I was an alcoholic. I wanted to find a way to satisfy myself without hurting anyone. That's when I started using the mannequin. It occurred to him that a mannequin might be sufficient to meet his needs, and so he hid in a department store restroom till after closing. emerged to steal a male mannequin. I had a big sleeping bag cover. I put it in that zipped it up and carried it out of the store. He managed to get it home to his grandmother's house and was using that to cuddle in his grandma's basement. I just went through various sexual fantasies with it, pretending it was a real person, that I was having sex with it, masturbating and undressing it. My mother told me about the mannequin that Jeff had taken from a store, and I didn't know what that was all about. And there was no signaling by any stretch of the imagination that I was having sex with it. Mannequin. My mother told me about the mannequin. That I asked him why he took it, Jeff said. I just wanted to see if I could do it, which didn't make sense. It's really unusual for someone to think that a mannequin would fulfill their sexual needs, but it's not so different from the use of inflatable sex dolls now. There's actually a condition focused specifically on that called Pygmalionism. There are individuals who become erotically fixated on inanimate figures of human form. It satisfied me for a short time, but never drove that desire for the ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction that could only be done, I thought, actually having control over someone when I flew to Milwaukee to first see Mr. Dahmer. People have in mind what a serial killer is supposed to be like. He was being referred to as a monster, but he just looked like some college kid. I could never have imagined that he would have done what he did. My name is Fred Berlin, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry, Behavioral Sciences at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Mr. Dahmer told me he had met Steve Toomey, and he had agreed to go with him to the Embass Hotel. He was a nice-looking guy, and we drank. We got undressed, laid around body rubs, and I found him attractive enough that I wanted to keep him. So I just made him the drink, and that was that. And what he told me he thinks happened is he mistakenly drank some of that as well. He wakes up finding that he's next to Mr. Tommy, who is now dead. I remember nothing before waking up in the morning. He was on his back. His head was over the edge of the bed, and my forearms were bruised, and he had broken ribs and everything. Apparently, I had beaten him to death. I couldn't believe it had happened again, after all those years. It's almost like I temporarily lost control of myself, man. And then he tells me his focus is upon trying to get rid of the dead body without being apprehended. I go down to the Grand Mall, buy a large suitcase, put him in that following night about 1 a.m. I check out, get a taxi. The guy helped me put the bag in the back, right to Grandma's. I take the suitcase, put it in the fruit cellar, and leave it there for about a week. It was November. Cold when my grandma goes to church for a couple of hours. I go down and take a knife to flesh, the body, triple bag the flesh, wrap the skeleton up in an old bed sheet, smash it up with a sledgehammer and throw it all out in the trash on Monday morning. I, along with 2 other detectives, went to Grandma's house. We checked the entire bog for any type of evidence, and we did recover a sledgehammer, but we checked with luminol for blood and couldn't find any blood or bones after that. Killing Mr. Dahmer really began to deteriorate. Now, instead of going to church and praying, it was almost like a reverse religious conversion. Maybe there's a devil. Maybe this is my purpose in life. Maybe I'm supposed to be doing this. From then on, it was a craving, a hunger. I just kept doing it whenever the opportunity presented itself. It was an incessant and never-ending desire to have someone at whatever cost, someone good-looking. It just filled my thoughts all day long, increasing in intensity throughout the years. When I was living with Grandma, I spoke to his grandma, and she was a church-going woman. She did say she thought he had homosexual tendencies because he would bring people over to the house and take them in the basement. My name is Ron Flowers, and I met Jeffrey Dahmer in Milwaukee in 1988. We had a group of friends that used to go up to this nightclub, Club 219, Saturday night. It was a pretty normal night. Lot of dancing, everybody laughing, just having a good time. I left around 1:15. My car was parked across the street, but when I tried to start it, it wouldn't start. This man came up to me. He said, "Are you having trouble?" So I explained to him I had some trouble with my car, and he said, "But I live close by. If you want, we can just go to my house, pick up my car and come back, and then we'll get you going." So I said, okay. He introduced himself as Jeff. We walked up the front walkway and to the side of the house. The first thing he did when we went in there is he took out a bottle of alcohol, and he said, "Do you want a drink?" I got a little upset, and I said, I already told you I'm here to get my car. And that's it. So he said, "Okay, I understand, but I'm going to make myself a kluk of coffee." So I said, okay. I was drinking the coffee kind of quickly, and I finished it. I said, "Okay, let's go." And he said, "Well, just a minute." He was staring at me in a way that was scary. It was almost like he was waiting for something to happen. And I got really dizzy, and I just went forward, and the last thing I saw was the floor and his shoes. It was sheer terror. My next memory was waking up in the hospital. I knew that he had drugged me. I couldn't figure out why. I was just surprised to be alive. All of my muscles hurt, and there was a ligature mark around my neck. This is the hardest part to talk about. I looked down, and I noticed that my underwear were inside out. The thing that set me over the edge was when I looked closer, I saw a blonde hair on the inside of my clothing. It was a human head hair. It was a nightmare. It was devastating. I went to the police department. I told them that I was drugged and I was sexually assaulted. He told them that we had been drinking all night long and that we were both very drunk. We were in a relationship when we had trouble. He helped me get on the bus, and that was the last that he saw me. After this, the police start getting kind of funny. I told you, I have never seen this guy before. The police told me that he had a criminal record. They told me, well, it's his word against your word. I said, you're taking the word over a convicted criminal, over the word of someone who's never been in trouble in their life. And they just kind of shrugged it off. I decided there was nothing else that I'm going to be able to tell them that's going to make them look into him. I stood up and I said, "You're going to catch this exploiter one day." And then I turned and walked out. I knew he's going to do this again. I just knew that. My mother told me about Jeff's having some strange men into their house. My mother said that she had saw this person stumbling from our house. That was alarming. I didn't want anything to happen to my mother. There was pressure from my grandma and Dad. I guess you could say I was sort of eased out. Word had gotten out about my late-night activities, so they thought it would be better to just move out. He had moved from Grandma's house to 808 North 24th Street. Dahmer purchased a Polaroid camera after his first few victims, and then he started taking Polaroids of them. He had 85 photos, 13 victims, and he would pose them in a particular fashion with their legs bent on their back and their hands behind their heads, and he'd open their eyes sometimes or open their mouth, and then he would take pictures of cutting up his victims. The pictures weren't as fulfilling as actually having someone there. It was a Sunday morning, walking along the street, wanted some sexual activity, saw him, and attractive guy offered him $50 for some pictures. He agreed. Since in phone he was 14 at the time he went to his apartment, and Dahmer gave him P. And Samak walked out. Dahmer was subsequently arrested for second-degree sexual assault. It was terribly difficult. I just couldn't really deal with it. It affected me very greatly. I did question about it. What exactly did you think you were doing? No answer. No good answer at all. Dahmer ended up pleading guilty through assaulting Samak, Sistan Phone, and he was sentenced to a year in the House of Correction, work release. And then 5 years probation. I always wanted the best for Jeff, always. I just hoped against hope that he would improve, or talk about things and get things straightened out, whatever it is that's bothering him. This is a letter that I wrote to Judge William Gardner. I am writing in regard to my son, Jeff Dahmer, who is scheduled to be released March the 3rd. My son shouted, "Leave the son!" Son, said Dahmer. "You like your son?" 990. I have reservations regarding Jeff's chances when he hits the streets. I have experienced an extremely frustrating time trying to urge initiation of some type of treatment. I sincerely hope that you might intervene in some way to help my son, who I love very much, and for whom I want a better life. I do feel, though, that this may be our last chance to initiate something lasting. And, moving forward, you will either learn to be strong or be capable of losing any will of your own. Said Darkness, that you can hold the key. Sincerely yours. Lionel Dahmer. When I wrote that letter, I remember feeling someone's got to do something. I had no idea that would escalate to that horrible, gruesome situation. Right now we're at where the Oxford Apartments used to be before they tore it down a few years ago, back in the early 90s. This entire area was considered to be a drug city. You would be walking down the street and you would find bags of crack on the pavement, and you'd have dealers standing on the corners. Everywhere you look, you would see someone selling drugs. The neighborhood was predominantly black, and Jeffrey Dahmer was the only single white male that lived in the area. For him to choose this place was ideal because the police were concentrating for the drug activity, so he was hiding in plain sight. I was willing to take my chances in that neighborhood. It was generally quiet. There wasn't a lot of distraction or noise. A lot of privacy. It worked out nicely. The first time I met Jeffrey Dahmer was when we were passing each other in the hallway. He lived in apartment 2 floors, 113, and we lived in apartment 214. We started talking to each other. He worked at the, Brusher chocolate factory downtown in Milwaukee. He was just a normal guy that kept to himself and seemed like easygoing, and I could not see him hurting anyone, not even a fly. After having killed several different men, disposed of their remains, Dahmer was feeling this is such a waste. He thought, maybe I could incorporate some of that person into myself so they could live on in that way. What he did was cook and eat a piece of the bicep of a man that he had particularly admired. While looking at a photograph of the man, that would be Rick Beeks. His nickname was Cash D. He had it tattooed on his chest. He was working the bars and stuff. Nail, prostitute, save the heart, the biceps. And I would cook it and then look at the picture. There's no way of saying it without sounding gruesome. I don't know how to describe it. You've had filet mignon, haven't you? Yeah, very tender. It did give me some satisfaction. It made it feel like they were more of a part of me. So what have you been doing lately? Working next week, starting Monday. I go back to work Sunday nights. So you go back to work this Sunday night, great. Yeah, you're looking good though. Look nice, trim. Oh, that's good to hear. You look like you're working out. No. I've been surviving on McDonald's food for, since I moved down there. There was clearly progression over time. With Dahmer, I'd referred to it more as a deterioration. He'd always wanted to have the sense that somehow these people could live on with him. And then he got the very disturbed idea, well, Maybe they don't need to be dead for them to live on with me. Maybe I could create this state between life and death in which they could be a companion. I wanted to see if it was possible to make, it sounds really gross, zombies, people who would not have a will of their own. So I started using the drilling technique. He drilled a hole into the skull and inserted acid that killed quickly. So he gave up on that. Then he started using more dilute acid. So he's experimenting to try to find a procedure that will allow him to make a living, compliant, conscious sex partner. I spoke to Dahmer about each and every one of his victims. One of them, Conray, Synthis and Foam, he had hoped was going to be a success story. He had already drugged him to Dee's surprise. Conray escaped the apartment and ran down to the street. My name is Nicole Chase, and in 1991 I tried to save a young 14-year-old boy from a serial killer. Well, this was the boy. Connor sent us a phone. I never talked about it. I guess it's just time to say something, and it's, how many years? Almost 30. I was in a car with some friends, and we were going over to my cousin's house. I'm 17 at the time. I was looking out the window. I saw someone that appeared to look naked. It was a young boy. They were kind of just staggering and falling, and stand down for a little bit and get up, fall back down, and I'm like, look, we was parked right there. I jump out, I run from that corner to all the way. By the time I got to him, he was about in the middle of that gate right there. He was holding on to me with a really, really strong grip, and he was trembling, he was shaking, so I just stayed with him, and I was like, I'm going to get you some help. Emergency operator 71, okay? Hi. I'm on 25th EST, and this young man, he is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He's very bruised up. He can't stand. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt, and he needs some. Where is he at on 25th Estate? The corner of 25th Estate. And as I was speaking to the operator, there was a man who appeared, a tall, white, nice-looking male. He was coming toward the boy, and he ends up grabbing him by his arm, taking it behind his back, and yanking them up, and forcing them, and the boy is, kind of just trying to get away, but he can't, because he really weak. I ended up going across the street. I'm like, excuse me, I dial 911, help, on the way. And he looking like, oh no, like no. He's like, no, okay. He yanks the boy up, and then I see blood in his rectum when he yanked them up like that. At this point, I really get physical, like, let him go, he's not going with you. He not going with you. I wasn't going to let him take him. We done struggle. We in the street. We struggle from the street to the alley. But I hear these Coos Fire Department ended up coming first. They covered the boy with the blanket, and I'm flagging the police car, so when I get up there, the police chit-chatting, the man was saying, he's my friend, he's okay, he drunk, and he wandered off. He was very calm, but when he spoke about me, he was rude and just disrespectful. He calling me another crazy black. Something wrong with her, she did. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, excuse me, I'm out of breath, but I'm like, excuse me. I don't think he knows. He was saying, and there was like, wait, we'll get to you. Said it really nice. We'll get to you, don't we? We'll talk to you. I waited. Those people didn't even look at me. They didn't make no contact with me. I said, you know what? Let me go in here to my auntie house real fast. I went to my auntie house, in and out, told her, like, right now, the police, it's a young boy, something ain't right, come back outside, police car, gone, fire truck gone, just gone. Everybody gone. So I really didn't know 100% if he ended up going to the hospital. It shook me that I didn't know for sure, because I definitely didn't want him to go back with him. And so I talked to my auntie, and I was telling her, like, maybe you could, I don't know, call to say help, please. Yes, that was the Squad C number 68. That was slagged down earlier this evening, about 15 minutes ago. That was me, yeah. What happened? I mean, my daughters and my niece witnessed what was going on. Was anything done about this situation? Do you need the names or no information or anything from them? No, not at all. You don't. No, that's intoxicated. Boyfriend of another boyfriend. Well, how old was this child? He wasn't a child. It was an adult. Are you sure? I'm 17 at the time, so, and he looks younger than me, and so, I mean, it was obvious. He is a kid. He's a kid. Yeah, no, he is, it's all taken care of, Mum. He's not a child. No, it's a boyfriend thing, and he's got belongings at the house where he came from, got the very pictures of himself and his boyfriend and so forth. So, oh, I see. Okay. Oh, okay, okay, bye-bye. When my auntie made the call, and they clarified, they gave him back. He's with his lover, so they're good. I'm knowing it's not good. I felt terrible because I felt in my soul that it was not right. If I'd been thinking rationally, I would have stopped. I wasn't thinking rationally because it just increased and increased. I was very, very careful for years. And years, very careful about making sure nothing incriminating remained, but these last few months, they just went nuts. The bodies were piling up. He had to figure out a way to get rid of all of these bodies. So he went to the hardware store and found the biggest barrel that he could find, and he decided that if he filled that with muriatic acid, he would be able to dissolve the body parts. There was a night where the smell woke me up. The first thing I thought was that our cat had took a poop on our kitchen table, and it turned out that the smell was coming from apartment 213, Jeff's apartment. The next morning, I went to work, and my wife, she waited for him to come home. She was filing, and he told her that his freezer had stopped working overnight and the meat had spoiled. I totally believed his story. I was completely swept along with my own compulsion. I don't know how else to put it. It didn't satisfy me completely, so maybe I was thinking another one will, maybe this one will, and the numbers start growing and growing and growing. That's cousin complete overload. I just couldn't control it anymore. I believe that Mr. Dahmer just became more and more out of control as time went along. He'd given up and made less of an effort to not be detected. Dahmer had met a guy named Tracy Edwards and invited him over his apartment to pose for him, and he give her money. I didn't have any sleeping pills that time. I had planned on getting him real drunk, so he tried to persuade Teresi to let him handcuff him and take pictures of him in bondage, and then he threatened him with a knife. He got this knife, pointed at me. He asked me, could he put his head on my chest and listen to my heartbeat, right? He told me, when he eat a part of my heart, I would be a part of him, he would be a part of me. I told him I got to go to the bathroom, so as I was walking, pee. The guy, I hit him, right, and I kicked him in the face, and then he just went back into, then I ran for the dooring, so now he's running down the street with a handcuff dangling from his arm, and 2 police officers see him. He started to tell the officers what he had seen, and the officers decided to go with him back to where this had occurred. Dahmer, when he saw it was the police, tried to shut the door. There was a bit of a scuffle. It was say he's got a knife in the bedroom. He threatened me. So one officer went into the bedroom and he saw a knife under the bed. Teresi Edwards also said there's something in the refrigerator. So the other officer opened the door and screamed. What he saw was a head on the bottom shelf. with the eyes and mouth wide open. Then they jumped on Dahmer and arrested him. Police in Wisconsin this morning are investigating a grisly discovery in a Milwaukee apartment. The discovery of pieces of bodies. Police found parts of as many as 15 human bodies. Inside, police were led there by a man who told them he'd been attacked with a butcher knife a moment. In that horrible evening that I remember very clearly was that it was quiet when they brought that barrel. Arrested him police with Carla MacDonald, and the rest of the evening that I remember very clearly was that it was quiet when they brought that barrel. Music from a musician named Wes Bishop, person in the police were ordered to arrest "Do Not Go Out" by the officers. Police were ordered to arrest "Do Not Go Out" by the officers. Apparently, everything is a blur. By then, word was getting out about what people had been living next to, and now he found out he's got dead bodies in it. How does that make you feel? It's shocking. It's terrible, you know. And here I stay right across the hall from this guy. There are 11 individuals or parts thereof that were recovered, and those would include 11 intact skulls. The suspect may well have been involved in at least 17 homicides. The smell and in the amount of body parts that they found was unbelievable. The atmosphere was pretty solemn. Through the Polaroids that Dahmer had in his drawer, we identified Connor's sensors and phone as one of his victims. I could not believe it. It was just too much. They showed me pictures of Connor's head cut off. They showed me pictures of his body. My mind was going just all over the place. He was molesting them, photographing him, cut his genital. Do you know that? Did you know that he cut his genital? I mean, looking at that picture confirmed a nightmare. A real-life nightmare. Milwaukee has been stunned, not only by the killings, but by reports law enforcement returned a 14-year-old boy battered and bleeding back into Dahmer's custody one night 2 months ago. I wasn't Dahmer discovered sooner, before he had a chance to murder up to 17 people. It should have been investigated right then and there, and I don't feel the cops are doing their job. The police department, individuals who responded, failed to conduct a basic, proper police investigation into the matter. Basic law enforcement practices were not followed. It acted differently that night. They both got fired. Then they got their jobs back. One of them is a police chief on the suburb now. My trust in the police system, because of that, is just awful. It's so awful, I get still upset thinking about that. 'Cause it just shouldn't have happened. So it bothers me. It's going to always bother me. I wish I could have just found some type of brick or some type of stick that night and never called the police and just knocked them out and took the boy. I could have really took him. Like for real, like I could have took him. And then he could have recovered. And in his family, you know, they would have to go through what they went through. But I never talked about, like, you just never know what a person to do. You never. So it's a relief not to have any secrets anymore. When Dahmer walked in the room, it was hushed. Seeing Jeffrey Dahmer was kind of a letdown in some ways. Nothing about him lives up to all of the stories that we had been hearing. Dahmer has admitted to 17 murders. This trial will be to determine his state of mind. If found insane, he'll be sent to a psychiatric facility. From there, Dahmer could appeal for release every 6 months. There was an old joke. How many people do he have to eat in Milwaukee to be found insane? Well, it's not about how many people are eaten or whether the whole person is eaten. What matters is, did the person know what they were doing, and did they know that it was wrong? That's all legal sanity is about. Witness for the prosecution, UCLA psychiatrist Park Dietz, argues that Dahmer is sane and in control of his actions. What is most appealing sexually to him is having control over another human in such a way that he can make, primarily, gentle uses of their body sexually. It says that during his murder spree, Dahmer knew what he was doing was wrong and took precautions to avoid detection. I don't know how anyone could come to the conclusion that somebody who is ingesting human beings, who believes that they will live on through him, who thinks he can drill holes in the heads of human beings and keep them alive as zombies, and I can go on, how, under normal circumstances, can one conclude that that person doesn't have a mental disorder, in my medical opinion. Mr. Dahmer was out of control, and was becoming progressively more out of control. Does Mr. Dahmer suffer from a mental disease that causes him to lack substantial capacity to conform his conduct to requirements of law? The answer to your question is yes. It was a terrible situation. All we could do was sit there and listen to them describing all kinds of terrible things, and it was just horrendous. It was just bad, really bad. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I understand you have arrived at verdicts in this man's state of Wisconsin versus Jeffrey Dahmer. At the time the crime was committed, did the defendant Jeffrey Dahmer have a mental disease? Answer: no. Dahmer is declared sane in all 15 cases against him. The jury concluded that Jeffrey Dahmer was sane, that is responsible for his behavior, and I thought that they made the right decision and listened to the right expert. It made me upset because I was told that the best place for Jeff to be would be in a psychiatric situation where they could give him help, whereas in prison, that you just don't get that. It was really very, very tough to hear. Very, very tough. And at the sentencing, the family members were invited to come up and to make an impact statement. 8-year-old son away from me. I'll never get a chance to tell him that I loved him. I have a chance to tell him that I love him the last time I saw him, which will be a year tomorrow. You took my daughter's only brother away from her. She'll never have a chance to sing and dance with them again. And for that I can never forgive you. I hope you can deal with what you've done. We lost. He destroyed the baby of the family, and I hope you go to hell. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you. I hate you. You. Jeff just sat there while she was screaming and he just took it. My feeling immediately when she did that was, this is to be expected. I would probably might do the same thing. Mr. Dahmer, you do have the right to address the court at this time. Your Honor, it is over. Now, this has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom, frankly. I wanted death for myself. I feel so bad for what I did to those poor families, and I understand their rightful hate. I will have to turn to God to help me get through each day. I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed and created a Holocaust. I felt that that was encouraging. He's at least saying something and he's really sorry. I felt that he didn't really know why he did it, but that he was sorry that he did it. I still blame myself for not digging in more deeply with Jeff at various times to find out why he did what he did, what he've been doing lately, working and working and working and working. Oh, tell me something that makes any kind of sense, Jeff. Is why you doing this? Why were you doing this? Convicted serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer was attacked this morning while cleaning a prison bathroom. He died of massive head trauma en route to hospital. What was found at the scene was a bloody boom handle. That's all I know. Inmate Christopher Scarver is expected to be charged with. When I found out that Jeff was murdered, it was just devastating. It affected me very greatly. I felt very badly about his having been killed in prison. I've often wondered whether Lionel and I are the only ones who grieved for him. It's just a nightmare, let's put it that way. It's been a nightmare for a long time, for years now. Obviously, my mind has been filled with gruesome, horrible thoughts and ideas. A nightmare. This is the grand finale of a life poorly spent. I didn't want unanswered question. All the questions have now been answered.